Hi everyone, welcome to Active Self-Protection Extra. Today on John's Briefs, here again with Tim Forshee from Forshee Law, one of the premier self-defense and criminal defenders in America. And I want to talk to him today about a statement that I heard about how nefarious prosecutors are. As a former prosecutor, I want to hear from the man himself. Firearms Legal Protection is who I trust to help me after a use of force incident. If you're a Firearms Legal Protection member, you can attend our monthly Active Self-Protection training seminars for free. Check out all they offer to their members at the link below. So part of the Armed Attorneys video on trauma kits, right? Good people, right? Emily and Richard, they're doing great work. I got nothing but respect. Sure. Having been former prosecutors, you as well.
Yep.
Former prosecutor, Judge Pro Tem.
Judge Pro Tem. I just want to make sure I was not a prosecutor in felony cases. I was a prosecutor in misdemeanor cases.
But still, okay.
Yeah, but I was a prosecutor. I understand the mindset. Yeah.
This idea that, okay, so they said, well, you know, those prosecutors, man, they're dirty and they'll do every little dirty trick in the book. What do you think about that?
I don't necessarily agree with that. I think that there's, just like anybody else, there's good and bad prosecutors, there's good and bad defense attorneys, there's good and bad plumbers. I don't think you can just categorize and say prosecutors will always play dirty. Prosecutors will. I've not found that to be true. Have I found some that do? Have I found some that were very, very honorable men and women and that I would be happy to sit and have dinner with and let them babysit my children? You bet I have.
You mean prosecutors are human?
Yeah, isn't that odd?
Isn't that weird? Well, and I think somewhat in these self-defense cases, the other part of that, you mentioned that in last week's video, that they don't necessarily understand self-defense well.
Well, everybody drives cars. And everybody goes shopping, and everybody's seen shoplifting, everybody's seen car accidents, but it's amazing how few people, most people have shot a gun, but how many people have actually learned how to shoot a gun or why you shoot a gun in a certain way or how this works and what the limitations of that are. What I find is that most of my clients, most of my students, some of my jurors, the only education they've ever gotten on that is from Hollywood.
Yeah, Magnum PI.
And that is horrific. I mean, that's just horrific. Watch a couple of episodes of the latest version of Hawaii Five-0. I mean, if you hit somebody with a 9mm in the chest, they're instantly dead. They're dead before they hit the ground. And how do we know? Because you take these two fingers and you touch this side of the neck for 1.4 seconds, and then you look at the camera and say, he's gone.
He's gone, yeah.
And most people think that's really how it works because they've seen that over and over and over and over for decades on television. And that's just, of course, you and I know, complete hogwash, but a lot of folks don't know that, including prosecutors.
I mean, my wife and I love watching Law and Order. It's like one of our guilty pleasures.
Dum-dum, you have to say that.
Yeah, dum-dum, right? But, you know, we get to the portions when it's a shooting or whatever, and I just go, oh boy, just no, let's do something else. It's not how this works.
It's hard to do. Yeah.
So, yeah, there's that part. And listen, I think I've run across, I have several friends who are currently prosecutors, and they're good humans.
Yeah, absolutely.
And they try their best to understand. But I also think, I know defense attorneys who are scumbags, quite frankly, and they just do it for the money.
Right.
And so, now listen, here's the other side of that though, is if you use a firearm in self-defense, you don't know which kind of attorney you're going to get. From a prosecution side.
And you plan for the worst and pray for the best, not the other way around.
Right.
So you got to assume that you're not going to get the benefit of the doubt. That's correct.
And I think if we see the fact that there are, hundreds of thousands of defensive gun uses a year in America, and yet we only hear, of course, about the egregious, terrible prosecutions.
I think at the bare minimum, hundreds of thousands. I think
maybe millions.
Even the Obama administration, I think, came up with a number of 1.4 million.
Yeah. So millions of defensive gun uses, the vast majority of which don't involve discharging the firearm. The vast majority of those don't involve death, but rather hospitalization. Remember, your modern trauma center is like Hogwarts in lab coats, right? They perform miracles every day.
They do.
And most of those don't result in prosecutions. And most of those, again, you get a good defense attorney, and then the defense attorney and the prosecution talk a little bit, and hey, man, we got a pretty clear-cut self-defense case here.
People don't realize that these shootings break down into three categories. They break down into this was clearly self-defense. He had no choice but to do what he did, and any reasonable person would have done the same thing. No indictment.
Right.
And then the other opposite of the spectrum is, oh my God, what were you thinking? You were high as a kite. You're an idiot. You found him cheating on your wife, blah, 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 and you shot him, and clearly this is murder.
Right.
And that one's a slam dunk. And there's a relatively small center of this bell curve. It's the vast majority of these are clearly in one of those two camps, right? And we only hear about the ones that are in the bell curve. So we're getting this really skewed version of what's going on out there, right? And we think that every time there's a shooting, there's going to be this heated court battle, and and that's actually not usually the case. Usually you get a reasonable prosecutor and a reasonable defense attorney, and I'll reasonably admit my client's guilty, and I'll convince him of that. Or you're going to reasonably admit that you would have done the same thing, and we're going to get the case dismissed. It's very, very few of those in that middle of that very short bell curve.
Well, and of course those make the national news, right?
Those are the ones that we hear about.
We hear about Kyle Rittenhouse. We hear about the McMichael's murder of Ahmaud Arbery.
George Zimmerman,
right? Those are the ones that, of course, make the national news for all the reasons.
Right.
But the vast majority of them aren't that.
That's correct.
And frankly, in those two cases, Zimmerman and Rittenhouse, I think that those prosecutors are the bad examples.
Well, and both of those cases were driven by, in my
politics,
opinion, political motivation.
Yeah, absolutely,
for sure.
100%, because the prosecutor is an elected position. It's a district attorney's got to get elected.
Well, in Florida, it went, we had to appoint a special prosecutor to appease the people with the pitchforks and the torches. So.
And so, listen, here's my thing. I just want you to recognize, in your profession, there are good people and bad people, right? Mm-hmm. There's good firearms instructors and there's scumbags. Yep. There's good YouTubers and scumbags. Of course, the challenge is that when you're fighting for the rest of your life,
pretty high stakes.
It's high stakes.
Well, this sounds flippant because I'm not the one that's going to go to prison,
right?
If I'm defending somebody else, but I kind of like it when prosecutors pull that crap in court, because especially if they pull the hollow points or cop killers, or if they pull the I'm not thinking of another example off the top of my head, but just if you shoot them behind the midline, then clearly that's motivation for murder. If they are going to just basically distrust the jury's intellect enough to try to pass a whopper like that, I just smile, because it's like, I know that with my expert testimony, with my closing argument, I'm going to show the jury that they were lied to by the prosecutor.
Right.
And that makes it more likely that I'm going to win, and win in a dramatic fashion. It's just like, you can't tell lies to people. And when I know they're lies, I just smile when I catch you telling a lie, because I'm going to prove to the jury you're lying. So people get all worked up, don't ever use hollow points, because then oh my God, of course you use hollow points. That's the only tactically appropriate choice. And if you're afraid of that in court, you don't understand how it works. Don't be afraid of that in court.
What was that old adage? When you have the facts, pound the facts. When you have the law, pound the law. When you have neither, pound the pulpit. Right?
And it's true.
So again, people are people, right? Yeah. That's why I think you want a great self-defense criminal attorney who knows their stuff and knows self-defense and is a good human. That's an overlapping Venn diagram.
If we ever meet that guy, we'll have to.
No. This is why we have Tim on, because he's the overlapping of the Venn diagram, and you want that person who can go to bat for you. You may get a crappy prosecutor, but them's the breaks. Right. You may get a judge that isn't into self-defense or doesn't know self-defense. Remember, a judge is just an attorney in a robe. Which means they're a human being, and they have some boundaries around their job, but they have discretion in doing their job too. I think we saw that with Judge Schrader in the Rittenhouse case.
Absolutely.
Who the funny part is, people were up in arms about him, and I'm like, dude, if you go look at his history, that's him.
Yeah.
Every case, all the time. He's kind of irascible. Okay, great. Anyhow, I don't think all prosecuting attorneys are scumbags.
Absolutely
and
not.
I've talked to enough, and here's my recommendation to you. Go listen to the Ask podcast, because every single week we have a guest on there who gives their story. And I think the vast majority of those know, and we talked to the district attorney and they did their investigation, and nothing came of it. We got a letter from him that said, go about the rest of your life.
Right.
And so, there it is. Tim, appreciate the insight.
Always. Thank you.